All right, last module, we talked about creating an effective team environment. And we kind of equated it to being the oil or the grease that really helps those wheels, the individual members, turn in a way that's satisfying and fulfilling, right? This time, we're going to talk about roles. So, specifically, we're going to look at role clarity and role acceptance. This is always one of the most interesting chapters because, like, generally, students understand, like, oh, yes, I've been in that situation. So, as you study roles, there are three types that we're going to look at. The first is function based. So, that's when you assign someone a specific job. Formal roles are very similar, but they're not always job based. They just may be a label, right? Like you're the captain. That doesn't tell you exactly what you're supposed to do. Whereas in function based, it may say, you check the roster, you get the equipment, you collect the money. Those are very job specific. Formal has a label, but takes some work to add those tasks to it. Informal are the ones that just kind of happen, right? And there's a list of 12 different types in there. And so one of them is like a class clown, right? So, or it doesn't say class clown, but the clown, the funny person. You wouldn't assign that as a formal role. It just kind of happens. Maybe that person is also a function based role and they collect money. Maybe they are also a formal role and they are the team captain. But you don't assign informal roles, they just kind of occur. Okay. So with these, any of those types, there are three critical elements. So it's ABCs, right here. It's the affective, that's the attitude, right? That's how the person thinks about that role. Behavior, how they feel about the role. Affective is feeling, right? That's our attitude, but our feelings. So how do they feel about the role? How did they do in the role? That's the behavioral part. And then the cognitive part is how did they think about their role? So feeling is the affective. Let me clarify. Affective is the feeling, right? Kind of our emotions about it. B is the behavior. Did we do it? And cognitive is how we're thinking about it. Those kind of align with something else we've been talking about this whole term. So just hang on to that. Kind of think about it. There's a hint in your reading. You're also going to look at the cycle, right? So I know you can't see this on the slide, but when you open your reading, you can. This cycle is kind of how roles get assigned and agreed upon. And anytime we have a cycle, there's always, or steps, there's always places for confusion. And so keeping it not confusing is going to require communication. We talked about that last module. It's going to require interaction. We talked about that too. When we assign these roles, or when these roles pop up, this cycle happens. And in that cycle, there's a lot of room for error. So we want to make sure that we're very clear with it and communicate both ways. If we assign a role, we want to make sure that they understand the role and agree to it. Okay, so that's a two-way communication, not just some quiet little assignment. All right, so kind of look at this cycle so you understand it. I just wanted to point that out. The chunk of your reading is role blank. So there's a whole bunch of terms associated with role. Role ambiguity, role clarity, role overload. Most of those, as you look through, you're going to be able to look at it and say, oh, yeah, I've experienced that. Role overload, got it. Here's an example. So sometimes when we do more written-based work, I ask students to do that. Reflect on a time when you've experienced each one of these. And it's almost always easy, right? We've all experienced it in some way. So we want to look at those. We'll specifically look at role ambiguity because when it's not clear what the role is or the function of the role, it gets weird. And the team can't function effectively if people don't understand their roles. Okay. So again, as you read this, think about how roles relate to TMI. Are those roles helping us accomplish the task? Are those roles helping the members work well together? And are those roles personally fulfilling for that person? So you can see where role ambiguity might make this not go so well. Okay, so in class, we've got an example that we're going to look at. We're going to kind of break it apart and see what we can determine. All right, so between now and then, you know where to find me if you need me.